The werewolves came at midnight again. I knew their sound before my eyes were open, a low, grinding resonance, like stone dragging on stone, too deep to be anything that lived. Not a howl, a hollow. That was what my grandfather had called them in the old records I had read as a boy, sitting in the archive room with a candle burning low, hollow wolves. The creatures the Duskborn drove ahead of their armies like a tide of silence before the flood. No iron stopped them. No fire slowed them. They moved through our outer walls as though the stone were river mist, and when they passed, the wolves they touched forgot how to shift, forgot what it meant to be alive inside their own skin. 3 nights they had broken on our gates. 3 nights I had stood on Ashenvale's high south parapet and watched my best warriors fail. I will tell you this plainly, as I tell all things plainly, because I am the Alpha King of Ashenvale, and I have never found comfort in dressing a hard truth in silk. On the 4th morning of the Duskborn siege, I was not sure we would hold. My name is Aldrich. I have held this kingdom for 19 years, since the morning I came of age and my father placed the iron seal of Ashenvale in my hands and told me the one rule he had learned from his own father, who had learned it from his. The seal is the heart of this pack. So long as it beats, the kingdom breathes. I had carried those words the way a man carries a wound, carefully, always aware of the pressure, never putting them down. The seal hung now in the great hall on its chain of moonstone, a disk of iron the size of a man's 2 palms together, etched with the old binding script in a language no living wolf in Ashenvale could still read. For 100 years it had been dark, cold to the touch. The moonseer women who served the hall had tried everything, blood offerings, moon rites, the old chants, and the seal had given them nothing. My father had tried. I had tried on the night of my ascension, pressing both palms flat to its surface while my pack watched and hoping for something, anything. Nothing. The iron was cold and still as river ice in winter. My pack did not speak of it. When a thing cannot be fixed, Ashenvale wolves do not linger on it. We had fought our wars for 100 years without a woken seal, and we had prevailed. The hollow wolves of the Duskborn were another thing entirely, but we were Ashenvale. We would find a way. That was what I had told myself on the 2nd night, and the 3rd. On the 4th morning, before the sun was properly up, my steward Garrick came to me in the war room with a face like a man delivering a sentence. The outer villages, he said, they sent what they could. He meant the wounded. Every border village within a day's ride had been sending their healers, their injured fighters, their frightened families. Anyone the Duskborn's forward scouts had not yet reached. The great hall had become a kind of way station, and the lower corridors were full of people who had nowhere else to go. I had ordered it. I would not close Ashenvale's doors while there were pack members in the cold. Garrick, who had been steward to my father before he was steward to me, did not always agree with my orders, but he carried them. He was efficient and loyal and useful, and he had a sharp edge to his tongue that I had learned to hear around when listening for the honest opinion underneath. He did not approve of the border people filling the lower halls. He thought it complicated the defense. He may have been right about the strategy. He was wrong about the rest. How many came this time? I asked. 47 from the eastern settlements, 12 from the river villages. He paused, and a healer from the border commons. Which border commons? The outer ones, my lord, no pack name. A woman. She came in with the last cart of wounded. There was something in the way he said it, a flatness that was itself a judgment. No pack name meant no standing in the old reckoning. It meant she had come from the loose communities that existed between formal pack territories, wanderers, traders, farmers who had never joined a settled line. Good people, honest people, people who had simply been born outside the structures that Garrick had ordered his whole life around. Has she any skill? I asked. She kept 3 of the river village fighters alive through the night. Wound care, not moon gifts, she has no wolf. He said the last part without emphasis, the way a man mentions weather. Then she has skill, I said. See that she has what she needs. I did not think about her again until nightfall, when everything changed. The day was long and grim. I walked the walls with my captains and heard reports I did not like. The hollow wolves had pulled back before dawn, which was their pattern, but the duskborn scouts had been sighted closer. They were testing us, mapping the shape of our endurance. They knew we were tired. They knew the seal was dark. Somewhere in their Northern War Council, a general who had studied the old histories of Ashenvale was watching the calendar and waiting for the night our walls finally went quiet. I had read every account of the hollow wolves in my grandfather's archive. The records went back 3 generations, to the last time the Duskborn had moved south in force, and every scribe who had tried to describe the creatures had run up against the same problem. They were not properly alive, and so the language built for living things did not fit them well. They had been made, the oldest accounts suggested, by a moonseer who had turned from the moon's gifts and learned to work with the cold instead, a different kind of binding craft, one that took the shape of a wolf and emptied it of everything warm. No blood, no heartbeat, no breath you could see in the cold air. They moved through solid matter the way sound moves through water, a slowing, not a stopping. And what they touched, they took the warmth from, not the life immediately, the will to live. The sense of being inside one's own body. The fighters they had reached over 3 nights were alive, in the technical sense, but they sat looking at their own hands as though the hands belonged to someone else, and they did not answer when spoken to, and the healers were frightened. My Captain Devin had asked me, on the second night, whether I had any plan other than endurance. I had told him honestly, I was working on it. What I did not tell him was that the plan I was working on required the seal to wake, and the seal had not woken in 100 years, and I had no idea what would change that. I went to the Great Hall at mid-afternoon, after the War Council, because I always did. My father had told me, go to the heart of the hold every day, even on the days when it feels pointless. Especially on those days. So I walked the length of it, past the long trestle tables that had been shoved to the walls to make room for pallets, past the wounded wrapped in wool, past the fire that my household wolves had kept burning at both hearths since the siege began. The great hall smelled of tallow smoke and herb water, and the specific cold that seeps in when a building holds its breath. The seal was on its chain above the central pillar. I looked at it the way I always looked at it, a quick, involuntary check, the same as checking a locked gate or a sleeping guard. Dark, cold, still. There were more people in the hall than there had been 2 days ago. The border villages were emptying, sending everyone who could move toward the fortress, and the hall had taken on the particular quality of a place that is trying to hold more than it was built for. The warmth was thin, spread too wide, and there was a low sound of coughing from the palatroes near the east wall that told me the cold was winning on that front as well. I stopped and spoke to several of the wounded, a woman from Rivermere with a frost-burned hand, 2 older men from one of the outer farming settlements who had been caught in the open when the hollow wolves made their second pass. They were frightened, the way people are when the thing threatening them is not a sword or an army, but something they have no name for and cannot understand. I tried to give them what I could, not false comfort, which they would see through immediately, but presence, and the knowledge that I intended to be here until the threat was gone. It was something my father had taught me. The Alpha King's most important job is not to have all the answers. It is to still be standing in front of his people when the answers have not yet arrived. I moved on. I had duties to attend through the long afternoon, messengers to read, decisions to make, 2 young warriors from the outer walls who had been touched by the hollow wolves and sat now in the healer's corridor with blank eyes and cold hands. I sat with them a while. I knew the history well enough to know that what the hollow wolves took rarely came back. My pack's healers were gentle with them, and careful, and I could see in the healers' faces that they did not know what else to do. It was there in the healer's corridor, in that helpless late afternoon light, that I first saw her. She was not remarkable to look at, and I say that plainly because it is the truth, and because what came after has nothing to do with the way she looked in the first moment I saw her. She was a woman of middling height in a plain traveling dress that had seen too many roads, her dark hair pinned back with a bone clasp, her hands moving quickly and without wasted motion over a fighter who had taken a hollow wolf's frostbite in his left shoulder. She did not look up when I came in. She was too busy. The fighter, a young woman named Bria from the river villages, was awake and watching the healer's face with the particular intensity of someone deciding how frightened to be. "Is it gone?" Bria asked. "Most of it," the healer said. She had a low voice, not soft, clear, the kind of voice that makes you listen without raising itself to demand it. "They're still cold in the edge of the muscle. I've drawn out what I can with the compress. You'll need to keep it warm for 3 days. Will I shift again?" A pause, not a hesitation, a real pause, the kind that means a person is telling you the truth instead of the comfortable version. "I don't know yet. The hollow wolf's touch is old magic, and I've only seen 2 cases before this. Both came back. So don't give up on it." Bria let out a slow breath and nodded, and the healer moved to the next pallet. That was when she looked up and saw me standing in the doorway. She did not shrink back. She did not bow immediately, the way people often did when they saw the crown braid I wore. The old silver cord worked through my hair that marked me as the Alpha King even when I was not in armor. She looked at me with a clear, steady attention, the way she had looked at Bria. Assessing, not afraid and not trying to show she wasn't afraid, which is different. "My lord," she said and inclined her head, a proper respect unhurried. "You came from the eastern border commons," I said. "Yes," no elaboration. No apology for having no pack name, no rush to explain herself. "Garrick tells me you kept 3 fighters alive last night." "4 now." She glanced briefly at a pallet at the far end of the corridor, where a man I recognized from the river village of Fenmore was sleeping with a steady color in his face. He was touch and go this morning. I studied her for a moment. In 19 years of holding Ashenvale, I had learned to read skill in people. The real kind, not the performed kind. This woman had the hands of someone who had worked a long time at a difficult thing. The calm of someone who had sat with hard outcomes and not broken. "What is your name?" I asked. "Myra," she said. "Just Myra. No lineage, no pack name, no title. The way people in the border commons name themselves, one name, their own, sufficient." "Thank you for your work, Myra," I said. Something passed through her face, not surprise exactly, but a softening around the eyes, as though she hadn't been certain that was the thing I would say. She nodded again and went back to her work, and I walked on down the corridor and did not let myself turn back to look at her again. But I noticed, as I went, that the cold quiet I had been carrying in my chest for 3 days was just slightly less. I told myself it was the relief of seeing competent care in the healer's corridor. I was wrong. I did not know that yet. Garrick found me in the war room 2 hours before sunset. "The border woman," he said, with the flatness he used when he disapproved of something and had decided not to lecture me about it directly. "Myra," I said. "She's asking for willowbark and ironwort in quantities we don't have in the lower stores. She wants to try a compress method for the 2 hollow wolf touch cases. Give her whatever she needs from the upper stores." "My lord," he paused, "the upper stores are reserved, I know. Give them to her anyway." I looked at him. "If her method works and we get those 2 fighters back, we will have needed every grain of willow bark. If it doesn't work, we will still have needed to try." He carried the order without further argument. He was good at that, the carrying, even when he disagreed. I valued it more than I sometimes let him know. The sun went down, and Ashenvale braced for the 4th night. I was on the south parapet when the first resonance came, that deep, stone-dragging sound, felt in the back teeth before the ears properly caught it. To the north of the outer gate, moving through the tree line, I could see them. Shapes that were wolf-shaped but wrong, the way a reflection in disturbed water is wrong, the right outline, the wrong substance, as though something had learned the appearance of wolves from a distance and had not come close enough to learn the warmth of them. I counted. Then I counted again, because I did not want the first count to be the one I relied on. 20. My Captain Devin was at my shoulder. He made no sound when he finished his own count. That told me everything about what he had found. 4 nights ago there were 5, he said finally. Yes. If they were to drive them again. They won't need to, I said. 20 is already the count that ends this if the seal stays dark. I kept my voice even. The wall guard were close, and they were watching me the way wolves watch their alpha king on a bad night, looking for the thing in my face that tells them whether to keep hoping. I kept my face as steady as I knew how to. Fall to the inner gate. Send word to the great hall, everyone who cannot fight is to go to the deep rooms. It was not a plan. It was a holding of ground while I looked for something I had not yet found. I was in the war room when Devin came back from the outer count, with the confirmation I had already known was coming. They're moving before full dark, he said. 20 in formation. The Duskborn general has come forward from the tree line. He paused. This isn't a test. They're putting everything into it. I thought of the 2 fighters in the healer's corridor with their blank eyes and their cold hands, and the child near the south hearth, and the wounded from every border village who had come to Ashenvale because there was nowhere else to go. I thought of my father's words, the seal is the heart of this pack, and the 100 years it had hung dark, and the 17 generations of wolves who had protected this kingdom without it, purely by endurance and will. We would need more than endurance tonight. Get everyone back from the outer walls, I said. Fall to the inner gate. Let them spend themselves on stone. The stone won't stop them. I know. But it will slow them, and slow is what we need. I was already moving, already reaching for my armor. Send word through all the corridors, everyone who cannot fight to the great hall. It's the deepest room in the fortress. The pillar stone there is oldest. It was not a plan. It was a delay. But sometimes delay is all you have, and sometimes delay is enough to find the thing you were missing. I will not tell this as a battle account. I am not trying to make a war story out of what happened next. The fighting on the inner walls was terrible and short, and I lost 2 good wolves who had been with me since my first year as Alpha King, and I grieve them still. What matters to this account, what I will carry and keep and tell until the day I am too old to speak, is what happened in the great hall. The hollow wolves were inside the inner gate by the time I heard it. Not heard with my ears, heard with something behind my ribs that I had no name for yet, something that had been building since I stood in the healer's corridor and looked at a woman with a bone clasp in her hair who had not flinched when she saw me. A sound like a bell being struck somewhere deep in the earth. One clear note. I was running through the lower corridor toward the great hall already, not because someone had called for me, but because something had pulled me there the way a current pulls a swimmer without choosing to. My Captain Devin was at my left shoulder, 2 of my wall guard at my right, and I could hear the eerie grinding resonance of the hollow wolves close behind, passing through stone, coming for the warmth and life of the people I had packed into the hall. I pushed through the great doors and stopped. The seal was awake. In all my 19 years as Alpha King, in all the years before that when I had come to this hall as a boy and watched the Moonseer women try their rites and fail, I had never seen the seal do anything but hang cold and dark on its chain. Now it blazed. Gold light, deep, warm, steady gold, not the flickering of firelight or the cool silver of moon gifts, but something older and more certain, like the first light at the edge of the world before color has names. It lit the hall from the center outward, throwing the pillars into relief, turning the frightened faces of the wounded and the villagers from pale to gold. And beneath it, her hand pressed flat to the iron, stood Myra. She was not performing anything. She was not holding a pose. Her palm was against the seal because she had reached for it in the dark when the hall filled with people and the torches guttered, and she had needed something solid to brace against. I understood that later when she told me. She had reached for the nearest firm thing she could find, which was the chain and the seal above the pillar, and the moment her skin touched iron, the seal had woken up. Her face was turned up toward the light, eyes wide, and she looked not triumphant, not powerful, not anything I could have predicted. She looked the way a person looks when they have been asked a question they didn't know they knew the answer to, and the answer has come out of them whole and strange and true. Surprised. And then slowly, not surprised at all. The hollow wolves stopped. I felt it through the walls before I heard the silence, felt it in the same place I had felt the bell note, that deep chest space that was waking up around something it recognized. The grinding resonance of the hollow wolves, which had been pressing against the hall doors, simply ceased, not retreated, ceased, the way a sound ceases when the thing making it no longer exists. As though the seal's light had not merely resisted them, but had unmade the old dark magic that moved them. I stood very still for a moment, listening with everything I had. Devin, at my shoulder, was doing the same. There were 30-some wolves in the great hall behind us, and not one of them made a sound. We all listened to the particular quality of a silence that is not the silence of waiting, but the silence of something having ended. The way a storm sounds different when it is over than when it is merely pausing. Outside the hall walls, nothing, no grinding, no cold pressure, no resonance in the stone. My wall guard exchanged looks. Devin's hand was on his sword hilt, and he did not know whether to draw it or let it go. The wounded in the hall had gone utterly still. A child near the south hearth had her face buried in her mother's shoulder, and the mother was holding her and staring at the seal with an expression of raw, shaking relief. I walked toward Myra. I was aware, distantly, of everyone watching. My captains, the hall wolves, the border villagers who had come to Ashenvale with nothing but their wounds and their fear. Garrick, who had come in behind me, was standing near the door with a very particular stillness that meant he was revising something he had believed. I was not thinking about any of them. The thing in my chest, the bell note, the deep recognition, had become very loud by the time I was 3 strides from her, and I understood it properly for the first time in my life, though I had carried the shape of it since I was young and had read every account of the fated bond in my grandfather's archive and thought I understood what the words meant. I had not. You cannot understand that word from reading it. Understanding it requires the specific moment when the noise your blood has been making your entire adult life simply stops, and in the silence you hear, not a voice, not a howl, a name, not spoken aloud, present. The way a name is present when the person it belongs to is already known. Myra. She had not looked up yet. Her hand was still on the seal, and the light was still pouring through her palm into the iron, and she was, I think, not entirely sure whether to pull her hand away and what would happen if she did. "Don't move," I said, and my voice came out softer than I intended, not a command, though it was shaped like one. A request from a king who had not quite found his bearing yet. Not yet. She looked at me then. Our eyes met across the gold light, and I watched the same bell note cross her face, a slow widening recognition, a stillness, as though she too had been hearing a sound she hadn't consciously noticed until this moment when it changed. She was not afraid. She was looking at me with the same clear, assessing attention she had given me in the healer's corridor, but there was something new in it now, something that did not have a useful name in any of the languages I spoke, though every one of them has words that gesture toward it, the knowing of a thing that has not yet been said. "The seal," she said. "I only touched it too, I didn't mean to." "I know," I said, "you didn't cause it. You answered it." She looked up at the disk of blazing iron above her and then back at me, and I could see her working through it. The Border Commons woman with no pack name and no wolf who had come to Ashenvale with a cart of wounded and a bone clasp in her hair, who had laid her hand on an iron seal that hadn't woken in 100 years and woken it the way a key wakes a lock. Not by force, by belonging. Your grandfather's seal, she said slowly. The old records call it a bond seal, it wakes only. For the Alpha King's fated mate, I said. Yes. The hall was absolutely silent. I heard Garrick make a sound somewhere behind me. A very small sound, quickly stopped, that in any other moment might have been the beginning of an objection and had become something else entirely. Myra's hand dropped from the seal. The light did not go out, it softened, settling from that first blazing declaration to a steady warm glow as though it had said its piece and was content now to simply be lit. She looked at her own palm. There was no mark on it, which surprised me a little. The old records had mentioned marks, a burning in of the bond. But then the old records had been written by wolves about wolves, and Myra had no wolf. Perhaps the bond seal's gift to her was not a mark. Perhaps it was simply this, a light in the dark that went on when she arrived, and the thing it had waited 100 years to say. I don't have a pack, she said, not an apology, a fact. No, I agreed. I'm not, she stopped. Started again, carefully, with the precision of someone who does not say unnecessary things. I'm from the border commons. No lineage here. No wolf. I'm a healer who kept 4 people alive last night and doesn't know why the iron is warm. I can tell you why the iron is warm, I said. But I would ask permission to tell you privately, when this hall is quieter and you've had rest. The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the shape a smile makes before it decides whether to fully arrive. You're asking permission, she said. I am the Alpha King, I said. That doesn't mean I stop asking. Something settled in her face. A last small guardedness going out of the eyes, the way the last candle goes out when morning has properly come, and there's no longer any need for it. She nodded. Then yes, she said, when the hall is quieter. I turned to my pack. I will tell you what I saw when I turned, because it is the part of this night that I carry with me most carefully, the part that still moves me when I let myself think of it. My warriors, tired, grief-marked, iron-worn from 3 nights of a siege they had not been able to stop, were looking at Myra with expressions I had not seen on their faces since the night, 12 years ago, when I had ridden back from the war in the eastern valleys with the missing pack members I had gone to find. Relief that has stopped being careful, the particular softness of people who have been very afraid for a long time and have just been given reason to stop. And Garrick, my steward who had described her to me as a woman from the outer border with no pack name, the way a man describes something that does not require further attention. Garrick was standing with his chin dropped and his hands very still at his sides, looking at the steady gold light of the seal. He looked old in that moment, not in a sad way. In the way a man looks when he has just discovered that a thing he had stopped believing in is real after all, and is now recalculating everything he has built on the absence of it. He looked at me, then he looked at Myra. And then he bowed. A proper bow, not the brisk nod he gave to visiting lords or the formal incline he made at ceremony. A deep bow, his back level, the kind of bow that means the person receiving it has earned something the giver had not intended to give, and is giving anyway because there is no other honest thing to do. My lady, he said. She blinked, looked at him, looked at me. I held her gaze. I did not tell her with words in that moment. There were too many people, too much noise still moving through the hall in the slow retreat of fear. But I hoped she could read what I was trying to say. This is what it means, and you may take your time with it, and I will not ask for more than you are ready to give. She gave Garrick a small, careful nod in return. I still need that ironwort, she told him. For the morning compress. He straightened, and for the first time in the 22 years I had known him, he smiled at a woman from the border commons as though she had said the most sensible thing he'd ever heard. I'll see to it personally, he said. The night passed. The hollow wolves did not return. The dusk-born scouts were seen at first light pulling north, the way armies pull when the thing they were betting on, the dark seal, The undefended heart of the hold has proved itself no longer available. They would regroup. They would not come back the same way twice, but they would come back, and when they did, the seal would be awake, and so would I, and Myra would be in Ashenvale. I told myself I was thinking strategically. I was also simply grateful. For the first time in the 19 years of my kingship, I was grateful for a reason I did not have to justify to my war council. I found her in the healer's corridor near mid-morning, after the first watch had confirmed the duskborn retreat, and the hall had been restored to something resembling order. She had not slept, or if she had, it was the thin kind, an hour in a chair while the compress worked on the 2 hollow wolf touch cases, both of whom had improved through the night, though not yet woken fully. She was at the window when I came in, her hands finally still for the first time since I had known her, which was less than a day and felt like longer. She heard me come in and turned. "Both of them are moving toward the surface," she said. "I think by tonight." "That's your doing." "That's the willow bark and the warmth and their own bodies finding their way back." She was quiet for a moment. "You said you would explain." "I did." I crossed the room and stood beside her at the window, because that felt right, not across a table, not above her in any way, but beside. The morning light was clean and cold, and the courtyard below was full of wolves going quietly about the work of a pack that has survived a bad night and is not yet ready to talk about it. I told her about the bond seal, not the abridged version I gave to visiting lords or the formal version I recited at ceremonies. The real one from the archive, the one my grandfather had copied down in his own hand, that the seal of Ashenvale was not merely a battle ward but a recognition gift, made in the founding age of the pack by a Moonseer who had understood that a kingdom's true strength was not in its weapons but in the bond at its center, the Alpha King and his fated mate, the pair whose joining the seal would recognize, and in recognizing make whole. Every generation, the seal waited. For some generations it woke. For others it did not. I told her what the old language around it said, that the seal was not a test, as some had translated it over the years. The Moonseer had not made it as a test. She had made it as a witness. Something that could see what people could not always see for themselves, and simply say so. A declaration in iron, quiet and patient and very old, waiting for the moment it was needed. It had not woken for 100 years. Until her. She listened without interrupting, which was one of the first things I had noticed about her, her quality of listening. Not passive, not politely waiting for her turn to speak. Genuinely present. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, looking at the courtyard. "I'm not a pack wolf," she said finally. "No. The old bond seals were written for wolves, for alpha bloodlines. I don't understand how." "Neither do I, entirely," I said. "The Moonseer who made it may have understood something we have forgotten. That the bond is not a matter of lineage, that it does not care about pack registration or wolf gifts or who has the right name." I paused. "It cares about one thing." She looked at me. "The match," I said. "What the seal is meant to recognize, the exact fit of two people, the specific way they complete what the other is missing. The language my grandfather used was the pairing word. Some languages call it fate. Some call it choice that was made before either of them was born." A long silence. I did not fill it because she needed it, and I had learned in 19 years of leading that the space a person is thinking in should not be interrupted. "You're very calm about this," she said at last. "I'm not actually," I said. "I'm doing my best impression of calm because I'm the Alpha King and it's expected of me. Underneath that, I have been awake since before the hollow wolves came, and I have been trying to understand what I felt when you touched the seal, and I don't have adequate words for it." She looked at me again, and this time the near smile completed itself. Small, real, the kind of smile that is not performed for an audience. "What did it feel like?" she asked. I thought about it. I owed her the real answer, not the convenient one. "Quiet," I said, 20 years of noise and then quiet, and in the quiet your name. As though I had always known it, and simply been waiting for the moment to hear it properly. She looked away, out the window again, and I watched something move through her profile, not reluctance. Something more like the careful handling of a thing that is new and fragile and unexpectedly valuable. "I'm going to need time," she said, "to think about this. I have never had a pack. I have never been the kind of person that a kingdom arranges itself around. I'm a healer from the border commons, and I walked into a war I didn't plan to walk into, and I touched a piece of iron because the lights went out and I needed something to hold." "I know," I said. "I'm not asking you to arrange yourself around anything. I'm asking you to take whatever time you need and stay long enough to let me know you properly. That's all." She turned back to me, and this time the clear, assessing attention she had given me from the beginning had something else in it now, a warmth, not performed, not offered as payment for anything. Simply there. "The two fighters in there," she said, nodding toward the corridor. "I want to see them through to the other side of this." "Of course. And the eastern border villages, there are people there who still need care. If the Duskborn are pulling back, the roads will be passable again soon. I'll need to go back." "I'll send an escort," I said, "and anything else you need." "I don't need an escort," she said mildly. "I've managed those roads alone for 7 years." "I know you have," I said. "I'd like you to have one anyway if you're willing, not because the roads require it, because I found I had to search for the honest word, and when I found it, I said it. Because I have only just found something I did not know I was missing, and I'm not generous enough to be entirely unbothered by the idea of losing it on a road." She looked at me for a long moment. The window light was on her face, and the seal gold was still warm in the great hall below us, and the courtyard was full of my pack going quietly about the work of survival. "All right," she said. 2 words. But the way she said them, not placating, not performing, but with the same quality of truth she brought to everything. They settled in me the way the silence had settled, the night before, when her hand first touched iron and the world stopped making the noise it had always made. The days that followed were not a ceremony or a storybook thing. I want to tell this honestly, and honestly means. It was slow and real and sometimes awkward in the way that beginnings are always awkward, when two people are learning each other's rhythms without the benefit of having started sooner. She went back to the border villages with my escort, 3 of my best, who reported back that she had declined their company for the last stretch because she knew every loose stone on the track, but had thanked them specifically for the dry cloaks, which had been her idea to ask for in the first place. She came back in 6 days with the 2 cases she had still been managing, both of them improved enough to travel, and with a woman from the Eastern Commons whose wound had gone bad and who she had not been willing to leave. She came back. I do not think I exhaled properly until she was inside the gates. She had quarters in the East Wing now. I had made sure of that, and Garrick had arranged them with a thoroughness that I noticed and did not comment on. She spent her mornings in the healer's corridor, and her afternoons sometimes with the Moonseer women, who had discovered that her touch on the seal had given her a kind of access to the old bonding script. Not the words exactly, but the sense of it, the way a person who has never studied music can sometimes hear what a piece is doing. The Moonseer elder, a woman named Seath who had been in Ashenvale since before my father's time and was not impressed by anything quickly, told me at the end of Myra's first week that she was the most natural reader of the bond seal's intentions she had seen in 40 years. "She doesn't try to force the meaning," Seath said. "She listens for it." "Yes," I said, "she does." In the evenings sometimes we walked. Not arranged walks, not court walks simply. After the last duties of the day, if we were both at loose ends, we found each other in the East Corridor and went out to the high wall walk where you could see the whole sweep of Ashenvale's territory rolling away to the north and the south, the forests and the river cuts, and the far pale line of the mountains that marked the Duskborn's home range. We talked about small things at first, about her training, her patience, the herbs that grew in the border commons that didn't grow this far north. Then about larger things, her childhood in the commons, raised by a grandmother who had been a healer's aide and taught her everything she knew. The 2 years she had spent working with a settled pack to the south before deciding she preferred the freedom of the border, the independence of going where she was needed. The fact that she had always understood that she was, as she put it, outside the main story, in the margin of things, and had made her peace with that. It didn't feel like a hardship, she said one evening, leaning on the parapet with the stars beginning to show in the east. It just felt like my life. I didn't need to be in the middle of things. And now, I asked. She looked at me sideways. Now I'm standing on the walls of the Alpha King's hold at night, talking to the Alpha King, because apparently I touched his ancient iron, and it decided I belonged here. The seal doesn't make people belong places, I said. It recognizes something that already exists. It found what was already true. She was quiet for a moment. The wind moved her hair and the bone clasp held steady. I keep waiting, she said slowly, to feel that this is wrong. Like I've stumbled into a room I wasn't supposed to enter and someone's going to come and notice and put me back where I came from. No one is putting you anywhere, I said. And you belong in every room you enter, Myra. You always did. The seal only said out loud what was already written. She turned to look at me directly, the way she had that first night in the golden light, and the warmth that had been growing slowly between us these weeks. Not the bond's blazing certainty, which had been there from the moment her hand touched iron, but the quieter, realer thing that grows between two people as they learn each other's honest shape, was very present in her face. "You're very sure," she said. "I am," I said. "I've been sure since the silence. I told you about the silence." "You did." "It hasn't gone back to noise," I said. "I've been waiting for it to. It hasn't. You're Myra, you're the quietest thing in my life. And I mean that as the greatest possible compliment." She laughed then, a real laugh, quiet and sudden and completely unperformed, the laugh of a person who has been caught off guard by something good. It was the first time I had heard her laugh. I held the sound of it for a long time afterward, the way you hold warmth in your hands against a cold night. I understood in that moment, something the old archive had gestured at and not said plainly, that the bond is not only the first blazing recognition. It is also this, the laugh you were not expecting, the joke that lands between two tired people on a wall, the quiet at the end of a hard day that is quiet because the right person is in it. The seal had known before either of us did. But this was where the knowing became real. I understood also why the iron had waited 100 years. Some things cannot be rushed. Some matches are assembled slowly, piece by piece, across the long patience of fate, and when they arrive they are the more certain for having taken so long. A seal that blazes for the first woman who touches it, without knowing her worth or her history or the shape of her attention, that would be a lesser thing. This seal had waited for the one it had been made for. It had found her in a border commons woman with a bone clasp in her hair who had walked into a crisis, and immediately looked for something useful to do. That was, I thought, exactly right. The ceremony was her idea. Not a formal ceremony, not what the old records described, with the Moonseer chants and the court in full dress and the Alpha King speaking the claiming words to the Assembly of Lords. She had been told about that tradition, and she had looked at me thoughtfully and said, "Is that the tradition, or is that the version of the tradition that accumulated because the court likes ceremonies?" I had thought about it honestly. "The latter," I said. "Then let's do the part that matters," she said. "In front of your pack, not the lords. The people who were here that night, who were afraid and who saw the seal wake." I had not expected that. Most people in my experience, when offered the power that attaches to being the Alpha King's fated mate, Reach first for the grandest version of it, the throne room, the assembly of lords, the formal declaration. She had reached for the most real version. The people in the great hall on the night of the fourth Duskborn assault, who had been frightened and wounded and far from home, and who had watched a border healer with no pack name press her palm to a cold piece of iron and make it burn. "You want to give them the end of the story," I said. "I want to give them the truth of it," she said. "The rest can come later if it needs to." So we did it in the great hall in the evening, with the hearths lit and the long trestle tables brought back to their proper places, and set with the simple dinner the hall wolves had made. My warriors were there, and the healers, and the border villagers who had still not made it home. They would go in the morning, with escort and with provisions and with a personal word from me and Garrick, standing near the central pillar with his hands clasped and his face quiet. I stood up before the meal and spoke plainly, the way I speak all things, and I told them what the seal had done and what it meant. And I told them that the woman who had woken it had agreed to stay, not as a prize or a fixed thing, but as herself, as Myra, who had come to Ashenvale with a cart of wounded and an open hand, and who had kept 4 people alive in the first night, and would keep more alive in the mornings to come. I walked to where she was sitting, not on the high table which she had quietly declined, but at one of the long tables, beside the woman from the Eastern Commons, whose wound she had brought back with her. I stood before her and held out my hand. She looked at it, then at me. Then she took it. The hall did not erupt. It was not that kind of moment. It did something quieter and, I think, more lasting. It settled. The way a house settles on a cold night when the fire is properly banked and the doors are all closed, a sound beneath sound that is simply the structure finding its ease. Someone began to clap, slowly, and others joined, and the woman from the Eastern Commons beside Myra was crying in the unself-conscious way of someone who has been frightened and tired and is now neither. Garrick at the pillar gave a single inclination of his head toward Myra, not the deep bow of the first night, something more everyday, a bow between people who are going to know each other for a long time. Myra looked around the hall, at the faces she had spent a week and a half learning, the fighters she had tended, the healers she had worked beside, the steward who had dismissed her in the same breath as her title, and then revised himself with the honesty of a man who does not stay wrong if he can help it, and I watched her understand slowly that this was real, that the room she was in was one she belonged in, not because Iron had said so, though Iron had said so, and loudly, but because she had arrived in it in the middle of a crisis, and made herself necessary and real in the specific way that people who are genuinely good make themselves necessary, not by claiming anything, but by giving everything they had. She turned back to me. Her hand was still in mine, she had not let go. "I'm still a healer from the Border Commons," she said, quietly just to me under the sound of the hall. "Yes," I said. "The seal doesn't change that." "No," I agreed. "It only says that the Border Commons healer is also mine, and that the trade, as far as I can see, is entirely in my favor." She looked at me with those clear eyes that had never flinched from me, not in the healer's corridor and not in the gold light and not in the evenings on the wall walk, and she said, not smiling yet but the smile already present in the voice, "Don't push your luck." I laughed. I cannot tell you the last time I laughed the way I laughed in that moment, fully, without the weight of the kingship on it, without the management of how a king is supposed to sound. Just a man who has been given something he did not know he needed, and is embarrassed by how obvious his gratitude is. The hall seemed to like it. In the weeks that came after, we learned more of each other. The things you only learn by living alongside someone, that she woke early and needed quiet for the first hour, and that I had always been the same, that she had opinions about the administration of the healer's stores that were more sophisticated than anything my steward had arranged, and that Garrick discovered this within the first week, and began deferring to her on it with a thoroughness that surprised me and I think surprised him. that she read the Moonseer archive in the evenings and asked Seath questions, that sent the old woman back to texts she had not opened in years. That the border commons had not been a hardship she had survived. It had been a school, and she had been paying close attention for 32 years. The Duskborn came back as I had known they would, not with hollow wolves this time. They sent a diplomat, which was its own message. They had seen the seal wake. They knew what it meant. The negotiation that followed was long and careful and is not this story's business, except to say that it was the most unusual negotiation I had ever conducted, and I had conducted several. The Duskborn had a word for the bond seal, they called it, in their own northern tongue, the living lock, and they had accounts of it from the previous times it had woken in Ashenvale's history, written down by their own scholars with a carefulness that told me the seal was as much legend among them as it was among us. They had come south this time, in part, because they had believed the seal was permanently dark, that Ashenvale was a kingdom whose heart had gone cold, and that what remained could be taken. They had been wrong. Myra sat in the room where I received the diplomat, which she had asked to do because she had grown up on the border commons and had seen the Duskborn from the human side of the line, from the side where a raid is not a war game but a burned barn and a frightened family and weeks of rebuilding in the cold. She did not speak often, but when she did, the diplomat listened, which was its own kind of recognition. One of the things she said, about the border commons people, about what the long back and forth between Ashenvale and the Duskborn had cost the people who lived between the formal territories, people like the ones she had grown up among, changed the shape of the agreement in ways I had not seen coming and would not have managed alone. The diplomat, a gray-haired woman of the northern ice clans, looked at Myra near the end of the third session and said, in the neutral tone of one professional taking the measure of another, "You are not what we expected from the Alpha King of Ashenvale." "No," Myra said, "I rarely am." The agreement was signed on a morning in late autumn, with snow beginning on the high mountains and the seal burning quietly above the central pillar the way it burned now every day, a steady warmth that my hall wolves had come to depend on as a kind of barometer. When it was bright and steady, all was well. It had not gone dark since the night she touched it. I thought about that sometimes in the private hours. What 100 years of cold and dark must have meant for the packs that had come before mine in this hall, the kings and the queens and the good wolves who had served faithfully, without ever knowing what the dark seal meant about their hearts, and who had simply carried on regardless, building and defending and caring for their people as best they could. I did not think the dark seal meant they had done wrong. I thought it meant the bond had a patience I had not given it credit for, that it would wait as long as necessary, through as many generations as it took, until the match arrived. Until she arrived. I think about the night she told me about the bone clasp in her hair. We were in the east corridor after a long council session, sitting by the window seat with the fire at our backs, and she had taken it out to repin her hair, and I had watched her do it with the particular attention I tried to keep private and mostly failed too. "My grandmother gave it to me," she said. "She said, carry something simple that lasts. The simple things outlast everything else." "She was right," I said. "She usually was." A pause. "She told me something else. She said the bond, the fated bond, the old kind, wasn't a lightning strike. She'd read about it somewhere, the old accounts. She said the people who described it as a lightning strike were always the ones telling the story secondhand. The people who had actually felt it said it was more like recognition. Like hearing a word you had always known the meaning of, but had never had occasion to use." I looked at her. "Your grandmother sounds like a woman I would have liked to know." "She would have liked you," Myra said. "She had a great deal of patience for stubborn men who were trying their best." I could not argue with that. She was quiet for a moment, turning the bone clasp between her fingers. She used to say that the border commons were outside the great pack stories, but that the great pack stories always forgot somebody had to live on the edges. Somebody had to be the person who came through when things went wrong in the middle. She said the edges were where the real work happened. I thought of the border woman with no pack name and no wolf who had walked into a siege and kept 4 fighters alive in the first night, and laid her hand on a seal that had been cold for 100 years. I thought of what the Moonseer maker of the seal had understood, that the bond does not care about the center or the margin, that it finds what it is looking for wherever that thing has chosen to be. She was right about that too, I said. Myra looked at me, and the fire was warm at our backs, and the seal was burning steadily in the hall below us, and she said very simply, "Yes." I think she was. In the spring of the following year, after the last of the Duskborn Treaty conditions had been met, and the border roads were clear, and the healer's corridor in Ashenvale was running with an efficiency that my grandfather would not have recognized as belonging to the same building, Myra and I stood in the great hall for the formal ceremony that the court had been patiently waiting for. It was not the whole ceremony. She had trimmed it, with Seath's collaboration, to the parts that were oldest and most honest and least decorative, and what remained was short and specific and moving in the way that only honest things are moving. She wore a dress that was not the elaborate thing the court seamstresses had initially proposed. It was simpler, a deep blue wool that moved well and had room for the herb pouch at her belt that she had worn every day since she came to Ashenvale and was not about to stop wearing now. The court had learned not to be surprised by her. Garrick had helped them with that, I think. He was, as it turned out, a surprisingly effective advocate for her particular brand of unceremonious good sense, once he had decided to be. When I spoke the claiming words, I meant every syllable, and I spoke them looking at her face, which was looking back at me with the clear attention she had always given everything and the warmth that was only mine to see. And when it was done, and the hall was full of the specific kind of sound that is happiness spread across a lot of people at once, and Seath had stepped back with a rare smile, and Garrick was doing something very composed near the pillar that I suspected involved preventing himself from crying, Myra leaned close and said, very quietly, under the noise, "The ironwort stores are low again." "I'll speak to Garrick," I said. "Good," and then, softer still, just the two of us, "Thank you for asking permission." I knew what she meant. That first night, in the chaos of a pack afraid and a siege that might not hold, I had asked before I told. I had held out my hand instead of reaching for hers. I had said whatever time you need and meant it. "Always," I said. The seal burned above us, steady and gold, and outside the walls Ashenvale was going about its mourning, and the bond that had waited 100 years in cold iron was warm at last in the way that matters most, not the first blazing recognition, which is its own kind of wonderful, but the long daily warmth of two people who have learned each other's honest shape and decided, each morning, to stay.